Can you hear me on? I guess you can hear me on Zoom. Welcome to the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. I think we're in our ninth week, ninth presentation, and we have two more after this. No, 10th. Um, at any rate, my name is Bradley Flam. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability here at Westchester University, and I'm very glad to welcome you to the Fall 2025 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. Our office is proud to co-sponsor this series with the university's Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. We are approaching the end of the semester, but there are still two presentations to come up. Professor Janae Akbar from Social Work will be speaking next week. And then the final week, December 3rd, Doctors Davidson from Nutrition and DiGiovine from Anthropology will be speaking with a panel of students who are exchange students studying at Westchester University. And so please join us for those. If you are here in person, there are hard copies of the program at the front of the room. If you are joining us online, you can find a copy on the Office of Sustainability's homepage. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Tim Jussaume.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I know it's kind of a busy time of year, but hopefully this is a chance to kind of step outside of the busyness of tasks and emails and enter into a little bit of curiosity. So curiosity is going to be one of my major themes. So the title is Sustainability as Global Citizenship, Creating High-Impact Learning Experiences in the Honors College. In part, I'm speaking from my experience here at Westchester as the Honors College Director. So this is my third year here at Westchester University. My background's in philosophy, so inevitably that's going to kind of shape a little bit of how I approach these questions and think about some of these themes and my own approach to honors education. I've been in honors education now since 2019 overall. So at my previous institution, I was outside of Tampa, Florida at St. Leo. I was honors director there for several years before joining the Westchester community. And I think this will come through very much in how I'm talking about sustainability and talking about this theme. I see honors as a place, or certainly my role in honors is very much building culture and working with the first year students in particular to get a sense for like, what does it mean to be an honors student? What does it mean to be here in this community? And supplementing that with programming and place-based experiential learning. A little bit about honors to give you some context and to sort of situate some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Our honors college mission, which is very much connected to the community. So we try to prepare students for lives of purpose. And I want to highlight this being engaged in local and global communities. So we really try to take learning outside the classroom. We aim to deliver transformative learning experiences for students looking to become leaders and addressing the most important questions facing our world. So kind of that's going to have that in the background as really informing what we do. So what is the Honors College? And one of the, I think, exciting things about honors in general is that it can look different at different universities. There's so many different ways to conceive and to implement an honors program or college. In part, a commonality that most honors colleges have, and certainly we do, is that we do see ourselves as a community and of students that really enjoy learning and have been successful in the classroom. They also our first year students live together. So one of the ways we do think about sustainability is that our first year students live together on a floor. And part of what they're imagining is, what does it mean to live together well? How do we structure a community that's supportive? That is not just thinking of any, it's not just about how you do in class. It's how do you relate to each other? How do you treat others with respect? How do you treat your space, your living space, with a kind of respect that allows you to thrive as a group. We're very interdisciplinary. Again, I hope you'll see that too in terms of how we conceive of our work in relation to sustainability. Really emphasize high impact learning experiences. I think honors itself is a high impact learning experience because you really do get to reconceive the classroom in a non-traditional way. Our emphases are around leadership, community engagement and service, global citizenship, and really a love of learning, really trying to, and so this is one of the things that I'm going to really focus on is how can we direct that love of learning in ways that are productive for not only how we think about the environment, but how we think about all the different areas of our life interconnecting with each other. So I was inspired in terms of thinking about this presentation. I was thinking about how do we define sustainability here at Westchester, and spent some time on the Office of Sustainability website. And what I really liked was this idea of the interconnectedness, that it's not simply, I mean, I think often maybe when we hear that word sustainability, we think strictly the environment. We think maybe things like certain practices like recycling or green modes of transportation, and those are all important, of course. But it's the interconnection across these different areas. So it's this overall sense of human well-being. It's economic vitality, that we're thriving, that we're supporting each other, and seeing the role of the environment in this kind of holistic vision, I think is important. And for us in honors, I want to talk about just two ways that I see honors translating that holistic vision of sustainability. So one of them is how can we help students become more attuned to the critical importance of sustainability in our programming in the Honors College? And I think the sort of meta question, the sort of second question going with that is how can we make learning itself sustainable? The love of learning, this kind of desire to know, this sensitivity to context and community. So maybe just broadly already, I hope it's clear that the way I'm thinking about sustainability is, it's requires a kind of sensitivity to the way in which so many different areas of our lives are interconnected. And that requires a kind of attention and a kind of curiosity. So points of emphasis. There's lots we could talk about, and I'm not here to give you a pitch for the Honors College or go through all our programming. So I'm going to really highlight two different areas. The first is that we have all the first-year students take this class together. So we have about 80 to 100 first-year students, and they all take Honors 310, which is focused on community change. I co-teach this with Professor Spencer Camacho. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit what we do in that class that's related to this theme. And then I also want to highlight some of our place-based learning through domestic and international travel that has very clear kind of upfront sustainability components. So the first one feels a little more implicit, the sustainability emphasis. In the upper level, a little more explicit, and kind of talk about how both of those relate. So in terms of agenda overall, share a little bit about how we think about honors community here and kind of how we're trying to rethink it away from a more traditional model. Talk about that curiosity course and some of the components of that, and then our travel opportunities, and a little bit about what I did at my previous university. Okay, so here's your plan. So here's kind of the backdrop in terms of thinking about the role of honors, and this isn't just specific to honors. I think you walk around the university, and this isn't specific to Westchester, but to every university I've worked at and been at, and talking to faculty and staff in so many different places, there's a real sense of a struggle to be engaged, of a struggle to understand the relevance of what we're doing here, what's going on in the classroom. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and don't really have time to go into all of that, but there's, I think part of it is questions about the relevance, continued relevance of a college degree. So there's been a series of articles and op-eds kind of asking this question, and it's a good question to ask, of course. If you're spending this much time and this much money, and this much investment, like what is the point of this enterprise? What are we doing here? So just a few more of these kind of highlights. There's plenty of these. You could have a whole slide deck of these. So this is informing kind of what for us, it's like, okay, what would it look like if for honors, every student in honors has chosen to be there. So it's no one is just placed in at least in our honors program. Everyone's making this intentional choice that they want something different from their undergrad experience. The traditional honors experience is much more based on kind of quantitative measures of academic success. You might have a high GPA, you might have a great SAT, things like that. And it's kind of just it looks the traditional model is what you still see now at the high school level, where it's accelerated versions of the standard curriculum, the non-honors curriculum. So instead of taking Algebra 2, you're taking Algebra 2 honors and you go more quickly. And in that model, the sort of what sustains honors is this kind of performance model that you do really well at school. You're good at playing that game and getting, checking off the boxes. And so I tried to implement so this is just a course that we ran at my previous university that was very much still based on this kind of traditional model of thinking about honors. And in this class, which was a lot of fun to teach, we talked about the relationship of religion and politics, but we really highlighted debate. So debate very much ties in with the traditional honors model, where you're having students in class take sides on issues, really try to give arguments for and against, and there's lots of value to that. I think you could kind of add to this list. There's plenty of things that you could imagine. But I also started to see the shortcomings of that approach. And here's some of the shortcomings on the right, that it really did set up our engagement with ideas, engagement with our communities. It risks setting it up as this kind of zero-sum competition, that it privileged certain students over others, certain students who are really good at thinking on their feet, who were good at making rhetorical appeals, who we're great in that space, but it wasn't necessarily digging into the ideas in the ways that I think I had hoped. And it was still very much kind of like playing that game. When it comes to thinking of sustainability, I think it also risked kind of turning these complicated issues that require sustained engagement and kind of coming back to it over and over again and seeing the layers of complexity. It risked turning them into kind of wins and losses and right and wrong. So my own, I guess this is partly my own personal story here. My own evolution as kind of an honors educator and a classroom instructor has been trying to shift not only how we understand honors, but how does that translate into our classes from a more debate, kind of zero-sum academic performance in quotes model to what if we made it more about curiosity and engagement and kind of being able to stay with these complicated issues? And in particular, what if we made it that being in honors was less about you had all those great grades and test scores, but more like you're an intensely curious person, and what it means to be in our community is that you're really curious to learn and want to know more. You're curious about other perspectives. You're curious about your impact on the world. You want to dig in to see how all these things are intertwined with each other and to stay with that, including the perspective of others and including your impact on the environment. So I've been trying to think along with the other honors faculty, it's like, how can we move towards something like a culture of curiosity? Like, what would it mean for honors to be grounded in that way? Um, and also keeping in mind that curiosity is not something we should just take for granted as something simply innate, that you either have it or you don't. Uh, or that if I'm simply, or whoever's leading the discussion is simply interesting enough, then folks will be curious. And not assuming it as a given, even among honor students. Because unfortunately, it's like it often has been the case for students who have been good at school and have done it for a long time, that they're good at that game, but aren't necessarily uh, don't enjoy it or don't, are excited to. The saddest thing for me is when a student gets to graduation and says, "Oh, thank goodness, I never have to read a book again." Like that to me is the ultimate kind of failure in a certain respect. So maybe imagining Honors 2.0, trying to think what would it look like to center the practice of curiosity as a key feature of honors community belonging. And can we think about defining our community membership? What it means to belong here is that we're all intensely curious and looking for those interconnections. So maybe some more specifics now. So this course that we've been running, and it's still a work in progress and it's a kind of experiment. And I love that about honors is that you can really be experimental and have it be a laboratory, is trying to position our first year students in their first year class as less about learning specific content about these certain ideas, or you come away with certain knowledge points, but more about developing a kind of practice, a kind of habit in which curiosity, you really are training your curiosity. You're trying to not see it as something you either have or you don't, but something you can actively get better at, that you can put the time in the work and like any other skill over time, become increasingly developed and mature and sophisticated at that. We've been using this text that I think is really helpful. Again, of really having us be sensitive to the context and to the ways we're all intertwined with each other, including the natural world. The text is "I Never Thought of It That Way" by Monica Guzman. And one of her main thesis is trying to cultivate the kind of curiosity in which we have these moments of breakthrough where we say, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." Like I had a certain way of seeing the world, and I didn't realize, this other way of seeing it, or I didn't realize the impact that this had. it also positions our ideas and arguments. And this is, dear to me. My background's in philosophy. I spent a lot of time thinking about ideas and putting together philosophical arguments, but recognizing that they're human artifacts, that they're things that we construct as individuals, as societies, as groups, as schools of thought, as ways of making sense of the world, as ways of kind of navigating experience. She argues in the text, and we try to, I'll show you some specific things we do with students. She argues for connection over certainty or comfort. So we're trying to think like, okay, what does it mean to design a course in which really relationship and connection are front and center, as opposed to here are these points of knowledge you're going to leave with, and you're going to feel like you really have a good handle on things. So there is something Socratic here in the sense of leaving the conversation maybe in a way, maybe knowing less than you did going in with more questions, but you've been really, the relationship is what really matters. And of course, she gives specific guidance on how to do this. So we talk a lot about active listening and asking thoughtful questions, exposing your own assumptions, withholding judgment. It's a lot about being present. Like, what does it mean to be there in the moment? And I love the fact, and this is good, I'm saying this for myself as much as anyone else, she highlights the importance of friction. Friction meaning that we live in a world that's often so frictionless that things are easily at our disposal. I can contact anybody in my network with a text right away. I can do a Google search for whatever. I can ask ChatGPT to help with such and such. Having friction, it's these moments where you have to pause, you have to wait, you have to be patient. It's not immediately accessible. And think of a good conversation where you're listening to the other person, and you're not necessarily thinking of what I'm going to say next. Or maybe, and then maybe saying something that's challenging or uncomfortable, like trying to encourage students to become more comfortable with discomfort and to kind of embrace the power of friction to open up kind of new ways of seeing the world and of thinking. So Guzman has this quote, it's kind of a guiding theme for our class and the text that I really like, that highlights the sort of way in which curiosity is something we can train, something we can really kind of cultivate. So when we think of it as a passive state that turns on and off on its own, so that's the view she wants to reject, we're missing an opportunity to own this wild and wacky virtue of ours. So there is something kind of strange about curiosity, which I'll try to talk more about. I'm going to highlight that idea of virtue a little bit. So when we think about virtue, this is a little Aristotle for the philosophy fans out there. It's a habit, it's a practice, it's trying to build good character. It's something that you never completely master, but it's something you work on through trial and error. So how do you get more curious? Well, it's the same way you become more courageous. You do courageous things. How do you become more patient? You do patient things. How do you become more curious then? It's like you practice curiosity and you do curious things. You engage in curious behaviors. So in this class, we've really tried to take that on. Like, what if we tried to teach curiosity itself? Not as just an abstract concept, and you can kind of talk about it in that way, but actually practice it and make it real. And what if we tried to design learning structures that let students practice being curious? What would that look like? How do you structure this? And this, in a way, gives us a chance to think about honors education itself as an opportunity to think just as much about how we move through the world. And this is kind of my implicit connection to sustainability, thinking about all the ways in which how we see the world affects what we do and interact with others, how we see our moral responsibility, both to people, society, and the environment, as opposed to just providing a set of conceptual ideas that you need to learn, and then that's what it means to do the course. So it's much more about the how, it's the process. So just in terms of thinking of those outcomes, I'll focus just on three things, and I don't want this to sound too like educator speak, but one is helping students identify obstacles to curiosity in their own lives. And I think about engaging in practices, behaviors that are not conducive to sustainability. Often it in part is going, I'm going to say when we're not curious, it's often easy for us to not see those impacts. So we try to have students think about what are some of the obstacles that are preventing you from being curious. Two, we help students build and sustain a curiosity practice throughout the semester. So what does that look like to actually do this and sustain it? across at least three months, hopefully beyond. And then inviting others. So not only learning it for yourself, but how do I invite others into doing that? And I think even like what you're doing here with these kind of conversations and presentations is not so far off from what we're trying to do in the class. And I'll show you some examples. And then I forgot the last one. We also do a very much hands-on. So we move beyond conversation into direct action. So trying to do a curiosity infused community service project that many of which have clear sustainability elements to them. So in terms of the obstacles part, and this is more informal in the class, but we have students try to keep a bit of an informal curiosity journal where they try to start being more thoughtful about their thinking. So you're thinking about your thinking. Like, what do you find yourself thinking about when you're outside of class? Like when you're lying in bed and it's 2 a.m., like what are you thinking about? Besides just the stuff you're going to do, like what gets you excited? What do you explore when you really are just kind of on your own and can look up anything, could research anything? What kind of topics and things are you interested in? What do you like to talk about? What do you always kind of keep coming back to? And vice versa, what kind of issues make you defensive? Like when somebody brings something up, when do you feel like your kind of guard is raised and you want to push back and you want to shut down? And just noticing, when do you stop listening? Like what are those kind of times when you sort of realize you've checked out? So one of the silly thing we do, but I think can be powerful, is have students in the class every time they go to check their phone or check their email to put a mark on a piece of paper. So we've done classes where we prevent technology. So like we're gonna really try to be present. We're gonna remove it from you. So close the laptops, close the phones. Other classes we've had technology out. But every time you go to do something not related to class, just put a little mark. And I'm not collecting it, it's not grading it, it's not shame, it's not, but just to be intentional. And some students had some outrageous number in 2 hours, in my opinion, outrageous, like 140. Then I'm like, I could see, it's just like easy to do that multitasking and that kind of scrolling. And we're used to that mode. So just being even just intentional and aware of it is a powerful moment. And ideally, and you may not have these, you can't really plan for them. You can be open to them, to have moments of I never thought of it that way. And being able to share those with the class is an important piece for us. We really call attention to two arch nemesis of curiosity. So one of them is certainty. And I think that's the one probably we're all more immediately familiar with. That feels like the opposite to curiosity. And it is in a certain respect where I don't have to be curious because I already know. Like I have the answer, so I don't need to explore more. I'm the expert. I've already determined that this does or does not matter to me. Full stop. The second, I think, is just as powerful and as I think more interesting is distraction. So distraction, and that was kind of my example I just gave with the sort of laptops in class. Distraction can at first feel like curiosity. Like when I'm scrolling on my phone and looking at all these different things, I'm like, wow, I've learned about pickleball, about airplanes, about poker, like whatever shows up on like my feed. But it's just like a rock skipping across the pond. It's novelty seeking rather than engagement. And so Guzman talks in the text, and I think it really connects with students, that what feels like curiosity is actually an obstacle to curiosity because it's preventing you from kind of doing that, like, tell me more. I want to learn more. I want to see the connections. So we try to set up a series of mini curiosity explorations throughout the semester to help with this. So one might be with a partner. You try to learn as much about kind of a randomly assigned and very hyper-specific topic in 10 minutes and share with the class. So in part, it's meant to be something that you're not already interested in as a way to kind of develop train this muscle of like, okay, dig in just for 10 minutes, but it can feel like a long time when you're not used to it, like digging into this specific area. Or maybe we have a guest speaker or something that's shared with the class, a video of some sort, and create a little healthy competition to try to remember as many details from the speaker as possible. It's going to be really focused in that moment. Or students can share in small groups a topic about which they're bizarrely knowledgeable. By that meaning like something that you happen to know a lot about 1830s British fashion, and you're going to share that with the group. Kind of be curious about things that you may not typically be drawn to. And it's not about memorization, but it's about connection and tension. So there's an exercise, and given the format that we're hybrid and in different modalities, I'm not going to necessarily do the exercise with the group right now. I think if we were all in one modality, I might. I think it's interesting, but I'm gonna talk you through it a little bit. And I've done this with other groups, and I think it's a good way to sort of experience a little what we do in the class around trying to build this, really about careful listening and also trying to kind of stay with a thought. So what we do is we pair students together, and we usually did more like 5 or 6 minutes, which is a really long time when you're doing this. But I put it here as 1 minute. You could even just get the idea. Is that you start by just you pair up with somebody else and you tell them about a problem you're having in your life, and you tell the person everything you need to know in order to fully understand that problem. So maybe you take a second and imagine, like, if I was going to do this right now, like, what would I talk about? It could be like, I mean, there's so many things that it could be. It could be work, could be family, it could be any aspect of your life. And so students will do this with each other. And I presented at an honors conference, and I had the group do this as like a 3 minute exercise. And it was amazing to see people like talking to total strangers about a problem they were having in their life. And then you flip. The listener doesn't try to solve the problem. They just ask clarifying questions. Like, what did you mean by this? Why is that important to you? Can you tell me more about X or Y? And what people experience, I think, is that, we ask them some debrief questions to kind of think through it. What people experience is this kind of a sense of being heard in a way that can be really, really powerful. We all want to be heard and to connect and to have this opportunity, even in this kind of contrived circumstances, to have someone genuinely listen to you, and to not necessarily try to solve your problem, but just to help you get clear about what you're thinking and what the problem is a powerful thing. On the listener side, part of the task is restraining you. I think most of us find like we want to jump in and fix something. We want to kind of work towards a solution. Or we immediately start making judgments that this is the right or wrong answer, or make judgments about the people that are involved, and trying to keep checking that impulse and coming back to just, I'm going to be present. I'm going to listen. I'm just going to try to get as clear as I can on this situation, rather than to step in and solve it, is an interesting exercise. And so now that we're like 2/3 of the way through the semester, I think this is happening in November, I've seen the students get better and better at this. Whereas before, having them talk for 1 minute on something could be challenging at times, or not have it go off track. We can do a more sustained heading towards 10 minutes, and people can sustain that even talking to somebody they don't really know or have a personal connection to. So we turn this into a project in class, in which we're really see one of our goals as, how do we foster meaningful relationships with others? So students take turns in groups leading 30-minute courageous conversations. And these are topics of their choosing. Many of these topics have are directly related to environmental themes, since we do talk about that quite a bit as part of how we understand community change. Others are, related more indirectly. But students are charged with like, what's important to us? Like, what do we really want to talk about? What's the kind of conversation that I'm going to go home at the end of the semester and want to tell others about? So they have to develop that topic, and try to help others, spark curiosity in others as part of it. So they do a few different deliverables, and I won't get too far in the weeds of this stuff, because I want you just to feel the more high level of it. But the heart of the project is them facilitating conversation and trying to facilitate curiosity in those that they're working with. So some questions that, in framing their question, you're really trying not to have it be a yes or no question, just as a simple yes or no answer. You want to be thinking about the sort of having lots of possible answers and lots of possible perspectives to be able to engage in that question. Thinking about questions that would spark curiosity rather than pushing people to defend a particular position. So what would kind of create that sort of openness, that willingness to see multiple perspectives, and thinking like, okay, how can we ask questions that would invite more perspectives into the room, more perspectives into the conversation? And of course, how does this connect into our major themes around community leadership, change? So how can we be curious about these things that really matter and really affect all of us? Just give a couple examples. So instead of saying something like, should college be free? Maybe we say something more like, how would free college change the way we think about education, work, and community? So it becomes less of this yes or no, or it's just like, yeah, of course it should be free. It's like, well, what would the impacts of that be? Or something like, is technology bad for community? And maybe a better question looks something like, in what ways has technology changed the way we form and maintain community connections? Um, Certainly, I could picture lots of questions. I know at least my students are very interested in talking about AI and thinking about that impacts on how we think, its impacts on the natural world, its impacts on even just how we communicate and relate with each other. So you could picture lots of different questions here. I'm going to show you one of the students' plans in a second, but they actually really plan out the conversation. So they think about, how am I going to prompt the group? Am I going to divide it into small groups? What happens when the conversation runs aground? What am I going to do in that case? How do we make sure that lots of perspectives are heard and it's not, we kind of don't immediately come to some kind of consensus that sort of short circuits conversation? How do we go deeper? And I think that's always the theme I keep trying to come back to in various ways, that we're trying to see, how do we get to depth? And depth, it requires time, it requires attention, it requires kind of staying with something. And then always keeping in mind the sort of arch enemies of certainty and distraction. What will your group do? What will your plan do to try to short circuit those? So I know this isn't as large on the screen as I would like, but this was one of my favorite ones. So the students put this one, this is one group's, and each group did their own, and I encouraged them to make it visual in this way, which I think is really helpful. I'll call attention to a few elements. So their guiding question was, if you could design humankind from scratch, what would you change about human nature and why? And so this is a huge question, obviously, because you're thinking about the meaning of life in a certain respect. What's our purpose here? But also, like, what do you want out of life? What are your frustrations? What do you, if you could kind of, be a designer, what would it look like? All kinds of ethical questions sort of built into that. Some are around very specific issues, such as like ethics of DNA cloning. Some of it's religious implications. Some of it is, how do we even see, like, does that even make sense as a concept to think of human nature as such? So each group did a conversation like this, and they all had some kind of idea about, how do we connect to the community? What does it mean for us to live well together? How do we think about all these various aspects of human existence? They did a debrief at the end, which, is kind of what you'd imagine, but asking them questions very specifically, like, how'd your conversation go? What would you do differently? How would you do it better? But also, what did you learn from it? And what kind of questions do you want to keep asking and take forward in what you're doing? So that's kind of one project. I want to talk about a second project and then kind of transition to some of our trips and how that kind of overlaps with what we're doing here. We do a project in this class that's a service project with a community partner that really does emphasize sustainability in multiple senses, both in terms of the kind of environmental impact, but also something that, just in the more literal sense, that could continue and be ongoing and have an impact that goes beyond a one-time discrete event. I think what's key for us about this project that maybe makes it a little different than a traditional service project is what the students really start from a place of curiosity. So it's not, here's what you need, here's what we're going to do for you. It's much more, what do you need? What challenges are you facing? Help us better understand the work that you do. And let's develop, we're going to be open to how we can support the work you're doing, kind of coming from that place. So I think it kind of flips in a really productive, positive way. And it's much less about solving a problem. And it's more about engaging deeply. It's really about seeing yourself, seeing your group as a member of the community. Like, this is part of what it means for you to be here at Westchester. And of course, they combine this with some research about the issue on a more national, global level. And so kind of seeing that connection between the global and the local is super important. And then they're doing hands-on work. So a lot of the examples, they vary widely. It can be everything from raising funds, resource drives, awareness campaigns, working on a community garden project, doing some kind of outreach. And it's honestly, for us, less about the specific things they do, although those are important, but more about the approach and the kind of mindset and the sort of curiosity that's at work and the kind of depth that you're aiming at. And this is sort of just a tangible, sort of physical manifestation of that curiosity. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit on the curricular side, what we're doing to sort of emphasize this presence, connection, intention, attention. More directly related, more kind of straightforwardly related to the environment, sustainability is our travel programming in the Honors College that I think is really exciting and it's been one of the best parts of the job for me. Before I mention that, though, I do want to kind of say how I sort of got started in this space. So this was at my previous university, St. Leo, and I'd love in the future to do something like this here. We had the first year students, and this is kind of my take on the curiosity course there. We did a place-based class, and I think there's lots of opportunities here, both in honors and elsewhere, to think about this. So I was in Florida at the time. So we made the whole course about being in Florida. Like, what does it mean to study here as opposed to somewhere else? Florida lends itself to it in a certain way because it's kind of this wacky, weird place in a lot of respects. And you can kind of piece through those stories. If you're familiar with the Florida man memes, like we would talk about that and sort of, really just as a side note, really interesting thing with that is we had about half Floridians, half non-Floridians. The non-Floridians were very familiar with the Florida man meme. The Floridians were not. And so having conversation about here's this idea, this image people have around the country, around the world about this place where we all are studying, what does that mean? And let's kind of dig into that and reflect on that and have conversation about that. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I don't want to get too far afield because it's not here, but you could totally do this kind of class at lots of universities. You certainly could do this here at Westchester, and you could think about what does it mean that you're studying in this place? And you could define that place in lots of ways. It could be this, you kind of do a more bioregional sort of approach. It could be political boundaries like Pennsylvania or Westchester or Chester County. I mean, so many ways to conceive this. But what I like about, and this was all about kind of the curiosity to say, the university doesn't exist in a vacuum. Our classroom isn't, sometimes we're in these, not so much here in this room, but some of the rooms I teach in, it's like cinder blocks all around you. And it can kind of feel like, just an abstraction. This classroom could be anywhere. And I think it's really important to think, no, it matters that this classroom is here as opposed to somewhere else. Like, what is it? And try to just have that be front and center. So that's this is sort of the flip side of what I just said. It's also important to take students out of the classroom and to be engaged in the world and to see sort of how these questions that are animating the things that we're studying play out in different ways. So in my first year here, I took students in a very explicitly sustainability themed trip to Norway, obviously recognizing that, there's a bit of a contradiction in terms of flying students so far away for a class on this. So we talked a lot about that. Norway has a long tradition of environmental philosophy, Arne Naess, deep ecology. So we made that really thought about how the Norwegian kind of society, history, culture, philosophy has a very distinct approach to the environment. And that was our focus on the trip. So I got kind of my first taste of taking students kind of far afield and the power that can have to really think about these questions and be in the place. We're fortunate to at Westchester to have a strong connection with Norway with the Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm not sure to what extent people are familiar, but we've been very fortunate to be able to bring 5 or 6 students every year to Oslo to attend the Nobel Peace Prize. So most recently last year, this is a picture, and this is where we were sitting, which was incredible. There's just a few rows behind all the laureates who had those are the reserved seats. It was survivors from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki explosions, 1945. So the advocacy group led by those survivors won the Nobel Peace Prize, Nihon Hidankyo. So we were able to be there, engage with them. I traveled with philosophy faculty, Dean Johnson, and these are our students that attended the trip. You can see it's in this spectacular space in the Oslo City Hall with all the Munch art, Edvard Munch, all around. And going with that right afterward, this most recent spring 2025, we took about 40 honor students, which is a lot of students to take on a trip, but took 40 students to Japan. And the picture on the top right of the screen is the gardens at Hiroshima. So we were able to have students, some of the same students who went to the Nobel Peace Prize also then and learned about the, very much firsthand accounts of from these survivors to then go to Hiroshima, go to the site of the explosion, go to the gardens that have been completely rebuilt over the last 70, 80 years. And it was a really powerful experience. So in this class too, we highlighted sustainability in the sense that Japan is kind of front and center in some of the issues around over-tourism. So if you look up over-tourism, you'll see certain places always come up. It's like Venice, Barcelona, Kyoto, Japan, among other places. and students in the class were really challenged to not only learn about Japanese culture, but to think, how can we engage with these really powerful, compelling places that have such history and culture and are really meaningful places to visit and engage with, but without ruining them in doing so. And the kind of and so Kyoto in particular, it's just there's such a crush. There's so many people that are visiting some of these places that are really struggling to accommodate, to handle it, and to think through that. So a theme for the course for us was, how can these experiences be sustainable, both in terms of on the tourist side as the one visiting and traveling and engaging? How can you do so in a way that is respectful to that place? And also on the other side, like what does it look like to be open and accessible and to share with the world, but in a way that doesn't also kind of destroy the very thing you're trying to share? So our students, I think it was a really powerful trip, and it was exciting for me to be able to see the impact of that firsthand. Uh, Maybe one more, and then we'll kind of wrap up and take some questions. I could talk about so many different angles that folks want. We're taking a trip to the national parks this upcoming spring, the American National Parks. We're going to be going to the Southwest, Zion, Bryce, Grand Canyon. And here, very front and center, I mean, our students were asking for this directly. Like they want to engage with these questions, thinking about the politics of the national parks, thinking about public land policy. How do we relate to these spaces that have been preserved, but yet are open for use? How do you do so in a way, a similar set of questions that, I mean, so they're going to see, the students are going to see, and I haven't taught the class yet, but they're going to go to the South Rim of the Grand Canyon and they're going to see the tour buses pulling up. It's going to be the gift shop. It's going to be this whole kind of scene around a kind of quote unquote wilderness place, kind of navigating that, and I think recent issues with federal funding for parks and shutdowns, et cetera, like all these questions are really, I think, highlighted. And so my hope is that, kind of as a way to wrap up, that I know I've kind of talked about sustainability in a very kind of broad and maybe not the way these typical presentations are, but really trying to cultivate in students this deep like fascination with the world, that they're curious, they really want to see how ideas translate into reality, that how we're all interconnected with one another, uh, and to go out and explore that, and to have that be really, really thoughtful about that here in our local community here at Westchester, and also connect that beyond campus, beyond the classroom. So I shared that's so those are, happy to send the slides. I know the presentation gets posted. So I have a couple of QRs, but I'm happy to take questions. I feel like I could talk about any of the different angles in more detail as folks want. But I really appreciate your attention, time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation.
Yep.
And I was also always grappling with the question, how do you justify being on a plane and doing all of that with a student?
Sure.
Which is not necessarily very good for the environment. It's much better for the environment if you would just tell them about
Sure.
the Zion National Park, right? But of course, doing it creates that curiosity, and that by traveling, it goes much deeper, and it creates an awareness that you cannot get just having somebody talk about it and somebody do educations. But it's still, I guess it's like in life, there is no just one right answer, and it's good and bad, but it definitely creates curiosity, that's for sure. I think you'll listen to the Travels with Risks program,
Sure.
talks about all these exciting things, and you just want to know more. Once you get started, you just want to know more. It's definitely creating curiosity.
Yeah.
But still, the other strong.
Sure.
Tim, I'm not sure those
Okay.
folks would have heard the full question. So
Sure, I
maybe
can
you
kind of
follow
give a
up.
summary. So, summary of the question is essentially, how do you balance the environmental impact of travel, such as flying to Norway or Japan, et cetera, versus the benefits of the trip in terms of sparking curiosity, engagement with a place? That seem fair? Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard question. I wish I had an easy answer.
I think I go back to the fact, I mean, obviously there's a cost, right? In terms of, we talk actually a lot in various classes, kind of the tragedy of the commons sort of idea where it's like, uh, when you take a trip like this, it's like, who bears the cost? The sort of carbon emissions is kind of everyone bears that cost in a certain respect, for these students to have this experience. So I do feel like kind of morally, it has to feel like it's really meaningful, and the sort of the benefits that you get from it justify that cost that we're all bearing through the emissions and through just the impact of it. Uh, in a certain respect, I do see the power of the trips. I mean, for the students, many of the students that are going on these trips, for many of them, it's their first time really venturing far from southeastern Pennsylvania or this part of the country. So we have students, and sometimes makes me a little anxious as the one kind of leading it when you have a student who's maybe never been on a plane before and their first flight is from Newark to Japan. So just some of it's just talking through like what that experience is going to be like and kind of supporting them through that. Uh, I think where I go back to is in limited, in the kind of right amount, it can have such a transformative impact on how students see the world that I guess I maybe it's a rationalization, but I feel like I justify it in the sense that if it has this impact, that it really has somebody think really deeply about their impacts, about the importance of places. I mean, I think the national parks very directly struggle with this. There's something powerful about going to these places. But they do risk becoming kind of consumer products in a certain respect, where you're, especially the idea like you're checking off all the national parks on your experience list, and I gotta like, in a way, I'm consuming all of them. It becomes a commodity that, yeah. So definitely, I think so much depends on the approach for the trip, the kind of programming that you're doing on the trip. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't, there's an argument that says you still shouldn't take the trip. I think it's trying to weigh that out. Yeah.
Like, I really felt really interesting, so just like I've worked like a choice for a class,
Mm.
but for like me personally, like my first year of undergrad was like a lot. Like it was like very busy. It was a completely new environment.
Sure.
Everything was different. I would love taking a class like this, like in that year, but I don't think it would be. I don't think it's flexible, I guess.
Sure, like a travel class?
Yeah.
Sure.
Like the travel, just like the additional class, like your first year. I feel like this would be a really good experience for like a lot more people. And I think a
Yeah.
lot more people would take this if it was a bit more accessible like with their schedules, because I think your first year of college has a lot of adjustment
Sure.
for like and it takes a long time. So like, is there any way to make this more accessible as a course for like more students who would like to? I think it's really, really interesting.
So you mean the travel courses more specifically? Okay. Yeah.
It seems like an added
Right.
responsibility.
Sure.
Like your first year can be a lot already, and this seems to
Yeah.
be like a benefit as well as, because it does have like a personal effect to it rather
Right.
than just like a set structure.
So a couple things. I think for most part, a lot of our students on the travel courses tend to be more upper level students. Some first years do, but for the reasons you're describing, it's so busy, the transition, the curiosity course, and everything I was talking about with that is specifically for first year fall students. So it's like we're trying to set this kind of culture and framework and build these skills that make the experiences even more attractive in a way, because you've developed this kind of curiosity and desire for those experiences. I mean, some of it's practical details around funding. Of course, there's cost. We have scholarships. We have endowed funds for students with high financial needs. So we're trying to think through those items. Um, the courses count towards our honors curriculum requirements. So it does count for them as part of their gen ed if you're in the honors college. So it in some ways, hopefully it doesn't feel like something extra that's kind of above the requirements we already needed to do for graduation. But yeah, I mean, my goal, I would love it to be the case. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to get on a plane or should get on a plane, but that everyone has some experience that wants to be part of the honors college, that's in the honors college, to do something that is really memorable and transformative, and that you can really like, when you like, I could talk about in a class of Plato for 10 weeks, but we have one trip where we go somewhere, they're going to remember the trip, of course. And it's not that the other things aren't important, but it's like, so I think when we say like high impact experiences, it's things that are really going to stay with you. Uh, so yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think trying to think through and I partly see my role in honors and the goal of an honors college in general. It's like, how do you make these experiences accessible to as many students as you can? that it's not just for a small number of students who get access to special privileges, but so with these courses, maybe something I'll highlight too, it's like any student at the university can sign up as long as you have a 325 or higher to be able to access the travel courses. So you don't have to do the whole honor sequence. So for us, that's also important that I think we're working on getting that information out there more, that it's, if you're excited about this and, you have, 325 or higher, then, you could be able to do this. So, but yeah, there's lots of good things to think through there. That's a good question.
Tim,
Yeah.
we are a little
Yeah.
after 12:50, and we usually pause at this point because sometimes people have to leave to get to another class right now.
Totally.
If you are able to stay for a few more minutes, I know I have some questions and there
Sure.
are probably more for others.
Yeah.
But so because it's 12:50, let's one more time.
Thank you.
And if you do have to go, please feel free, but if you.
I'm happy to stay.
Yeah, I'm a couple of things really attracted me in the presentation, and one is this emphasis on place-based learning and the ways in which that can reinforce concepts of sustainability. And you went into that in some detail with some of your description. Some of that involves thinking about place by being in a place like Kyoto, Japan, or Oslo, Norway, but we're in this place too. We're in Westchester, and the idea of linking place-based learning to curiosity about places that we think might be so familiar we don't even think about it anymore. Is that
I love that.
That part of the way you teach this course? Think about this course?
No, I love that question. So we have the students read David Foster Wallace's commencement speech, "This is Water," and he starts with a story of like essentially the short version of it is that fish don't know what water is because they're in it all the time. And so it's kind of to your point, it's like in a little bit what I was saying with the Florida class. I think it was really interesting in that class that you had conversation between people that were native Floridians and folks that were coming to Florida from elsewhere, because in a way it helped both sides in terms of that conversation, but especially the Floridian students got to see the place they lived in a new way. And I think it raised, it highlighted certain things that sometimes when things are so close and so familiar, it is hard to notice them and to see. I think here, part of Westchester's mission, obviously we're serving this region, southeastern Pennsylvania, so we do have so many students that are from this area. So I really, and I want to do more with this. It's really connecting students that where you study matters, the place you are in matters. It's partly it's kind of training curiosity. It's like you start to see that, every place is interesting in its own way. It doesn't have to be the kind of wacky, sensational Florida. It's like wherever you are, as you start to look more closely, you see there's a lot to look at and a lot to take in and a lot to learn. So just trying to create that attunement and that sensitivity. I think some of it, the local partnerships, having kind of students get a sense for sort of what's happening here and what is our sort of responsibilities to this community, as opposed to, the trips have one thing, but I really think it's important that, you're connecting here. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think I think it's really important, the where and the kind of, it's not just the what. I think education can often focus on the what, like here's the information, here's the content. And I think obviously the why is important, but it's also the how in terms of this curiosity, and the where, like where I'm studying, I think matters. It matters that you're studying here in Westchester as opposed to somewhere else, and trying to, dig into that context. I think it's super important.
Yeah. If I may,
Yeah, please. Yeah.
More points I'd like to share. One is that we do have members of our community of Westchester who really think about these issues around tourism. Professor Michael DeJovene, an anthropology professor, is one of his research focuses is on tourism studies. And Professor DeJovene, along with Professor Paul Sylvester, who's a middle and high school education professor, we had a conversation in this seminar a couple of years ago at this point, but it was all about the questions around sustainability of study abroad travel. And the question you raised, Karen, was one of the things we talked about. That is recorded, so shameless plug, people can go hear the conversation that we had, and we've turned that into an article which will be published next year. That digs a little bit deeper into some of these questions. So that's one resource. Professor DeJovene, I think, would help think through some of these questions. The second thing I wanted to say is, I was very intrigued when President Bernatsky, about a month ago, gave an address to the campus community. And one of the big announcements was that we as an institution are not going to be creating a new strategic plan. We're going to be co-creating faculty, staff, and students an action plan. And she challenged all of us to pay attention to opportunities to be involved in that. But there are 5 pillars that she's hoping we will all think about. And one that really resonated with me because of the work I do at the university is stewards of place. She wants that to be an important part of the action plan that the university is going to put together. And, you know, I'm wondering if that challenge to think about what it means to be stewards of place might become part of teaching in the honors college and teaching for every student and faculty member on campus. So I think there might be some connections between your teaching and this action plan.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, yeah, really, I mean, I think place is so interesting and kind of digging into that. I mean, when I imagine honors, it's like you're really trying to think, like, what does it really mean to get the most out of the undergrad experience? And one of, I think, like, you know, it's been thinking of our university mission as, you know, being connected to this place and serving this community. And so having our students be connected to that and thoughtful to that and imagining how that integrates into our curriculum and co-curricular, all that. Yeah, no, that's something I think for us to keep thinking about, but I appreciate that.
I wonder if any of our Zoom colleagues will have any questions.
I have a question, if you're.
Oh, sure, and then I think we may have a couple, no, we don't in the chat. Nope, yeah, please.
Pennsylvania does a youth survey of high school students, I think middle and high school survey students. And they also have like a disconnect with school. And when you look at education in general, what is the purpose of school? Is it to pass classes so that you can be promoted?
Yeah.
And then more of the same in college? Or is the purpose of school that whole idea behind curiosity and finding your niche in the world and growing that niche and hopefully creating a lifelong passionate job for yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's just one answer to that question, of course, right? It's a complicated question. I guess I see partly my role, the role of an honors college, beyond honors even, is helping students navigate that themselves a bit, you know, is asking those questions. It's like what, you know, part of it's just, I think, helping support students through that exploration. Like, why am I here? What am I hoping to get from this? I think you could imagine different students finding different points of contact through the university, different ways of understanding the value of what they're getting. Part of it is also helping students process that experience they're having and be able to talk about it to others. I think sometimes it's easy to take for granted that, oh, of course, students realize they're getting X, Y, and Z skill or in this, but actually, no, like rather than just assuming somebody can figure that out, being really direct about it, like, you know, and this thing you just did, like when we do that facilitations in the curiosity class, you know, we then tell students like that's a really important skill that you could share afterwards, that you facilitated, you know, conversations on challenging topics with a diverse group of students. You have the project management and you know, critical thinking to kind of process different perspectives. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think it's all in there. You know, I guess I am kind of advocating a more aspirational vision of the undergrad experience in the sense that it's not just completing the curricular requirements, although that's an important part and that qualifies you for graduation, but hopefully it's something more than that, right? That you leave wanting to learn more and seeing it as like the tip of the iceberg rather than now I'm done as a learner and full stop. So some of it's kind of this dispositional, this way of moving through the world, I would hope. So.
People have a curiosity and then they have a shared curiosity with other students. They build connection, they build community.
Yeah.
And when you have that sense of community, you have, I guess, a greater purpose.
Yeah, I think it all kind of connects in together for sure.
So we need to start this younger, is what you're saying too. Have a little easier once you get to college.
I think in some respects, you think of young children, there's such an usually is so obvious curiosity. I kind of think of the like why questions. And I think for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, it's like you often see some of that diminish in some people. So it's, yeah, I don't know, those are complicated questions. How do you keep that? How does that, I mean, it's going to look different for a 3-year-old versus an 18-year-old, and that seems appropriate, of course. It's like, what does that look like to kind of foster that as a lifelong project? So yeah, I mean, I think for me, probably why I went into philosophy in the first place is it kind of seems like it's this curiosity to ask these questions, but it's not limited to that mode. So yeah, you have to talk to the education folks too. Those are hard questions.
We are after
Yep.
1 o'clock. I wonder if anyone on Zoom has a question before we.
I don't think so.
Oh, I was about to sign out with the chat and got to go, but I think you kind of addressed it. I was thinking, I mean, I really, really resonate with the whole curiosity focus and the sense of place and so on. I'm a science librarian, done a lot of projects on local stuff, but I think one of the obstacles to curiosity is when people emphasize the extrinsic motivation as opposed to the intrinsic motivation. And you talked a little bit about that, but
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, inevitably, most honors colleges, and ours has some of this as well. There's extrinsic factors that bring students in. Maybe you get an extra scholarship or you get priority registration. I guess my hope is always that those are maybe it's what gets somebody in the first place, but then you over time really can see the value of the intrinsic, which is like I'm doing this for its own sake because it's valuable, not just because it's a means to some other end. And you can think of learning in that same way. I mean, I think it's similar to the previous question. But yeah, those are it's kind of like thinking of it not just as a means.
yeah.
Thank you, Walt. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Ted.
Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.